thrilled because today is World Storytelling Day, and I have the honor and the privilege to share in a conversation with my brother here, Reginald Dwayne Betts, the author of Felon. And I must say, it is not just a book of poems, it is a story of America's contradiction. And I just really appreciated being able to witness and watch the miracle unfold of the play American Washi Tale. It was amazing, and so brother, I just thank you so much for being here with me and sharing in this moment. And I just want to open up, because we're talking about World Storytelling Day, and I just want to know from you, what makes for a great story.
A better cameraman than me. I don't know if you can tell, but I can't get this camera to stay straight to save my life. Um,
It's okay.
I don't know what makes a good story. Actually, I think I try to remember I'm a poet, and one of the challenges I think for me being a poet is you trying to always balance between um, being a poet who's interested in these sort of criminal justice issues around policy, issues around incarceration, issues around violence. It's like you're always trying to balance telling a story with creating talking points. And I think the one thing that all good stories would do is resist that desire to flatten all of the complexity of a piece into just the pitch. Even though the talking points are important, the pitches are important. I think
Mhm,
stories try to find a way to get at it. Slant.
mhm. I like that you said that because it brings me to the play, American Washi Tale, because there is something that you do in the play. And I thought that it was like, I said, okay, this is creative genius here. When you had the judgment, and it was about, I believe, the town in North Carolina, right? The people
Yeah,
who,
yeah, yeah.
and you started redacting, right? So I'm just dropping redaction out there, right? The new book that's out. I mean, brother, you got so much going on, but just when you started redacting the bull crap, right? And you're like, what is this? This doesn't even make sense. Wait a minute. I'm creating a poem. That is like another way of changing the narrative. And for you to say that you are a poet, it brings me back to when you said, when you were in Yale, that the professor said that, this is where law school is where poets come to die. And you are a poet first, right? Because you have your master's in fine arts and in poetry. So, to hear that, why didn't you stop? Why didn't it kill the poet in you? I'm
Uh,
curious.
I mean, so it's funny because all of these stories exist in the way that they exist within art, and then there's always two or three or four more layers to the story that might not come up in the show. And so a part of that story was when I approached the professor to let him know. The professor ended up feeling super guilty, because it was just a saying. It wasn't, it wasn't. I mean, what fool as a poet goes to law school? You know what I mean? And it was like so. So I think that he was, and actually he teaches writing, and part of this guy, what he was talking about, really was how do you resist that? As even as a legal scholar, even as a legal writer. There's this guy named Noah Messing, but he's a really good writer. He got an excellent book on the craft of legal writing. And so actually, it was probably in his class where I started recognizing that some of the things that I found of value as a writer could exist in legal work. It was in his class, which I took the second semester of my first year of law school, or maybe the um, first semester of my second year. But but I think the other thing though that I would just say beyond that is I always recognize the law is freedom reads is the first time that my life has come together, and I feel like it's not like several different parts. So for me, when I was in law school, I mean, so I was like, I'm a poet and I'm becoming a lawyer, and I could sort of draw a line between those two selves. And when I was in law school, try to just embody the legal part. But those poems allowed me to bridge the gap
Mhm.
and not be too worn self, so to speak, and just be able to be the poet. Particularly finding a poem out of that legal document was it was one of the cooler things I've done. You know.
That was amazing, brother. That was genius. I loved it. That's one of those things that I kind of wish I could just take and use that somewhere. But that's definitely yours. That's your stamp, definitely. But you say how it was those poems. You also share about when you, as a young person, what, 16, 17 years old, you're in isolated confinement. You're locked in a cell, and you're not doing the things that young men your age would have been doing, whether it was getting into mischief or whether it was growing into greatness, growing into manhood. It's interesting how you talked about the book that you received, and it was poems.
Yeah, which was I should say that I think a lot of times we make decisions about what we think will matter to people, and a lot of the good fortune I've had is because somebody didn't make a decision that poetry wouldn't matter, and that was a wasn't really a stretch decision to make that the most important thing to some kid in prison is going to be a book of poems. Like nobody would really conclude that, but whoever had that book when I called for a book, they decided that that book might be the one, and that it was worthy of reading, and whatever that rationale was. But I got the book, and it turned me into a poet mostly because I was reading not only the Lucille Cliftons and Sonia Sanchez's and you know um, Claude McKay and County Cullen and Robert Hayton and Langston Hughes and Melvin Tolson and Gene Toom and all of these folks, Shirley Williams. Not only was I Nikki Giovanni, but not only was I reading them, I discovered Etheridge Knight, and Etheridge Knight had been locked up. And so him, he's writing about prison. It just made it clear to me that like I could write about prison and it could matter. And it made it clear to me that the experiences that I was dealing with like mattered. And so um, I hope that I will be able to do some of the same kind of work as a writer. And that's what I've been doing or trying to do ever since.
So this is my curiosity, because your story, at least from what we get in American Washi Tale, it takes place with you being this young person, right? And so who is your audience when you wrote Felon? Who was your audience?
I feel like
Who?
you asked me this before.
Huh?
I feel like we talked about this somewhere before about audiences. And did we talk about this that night? But anyway,
We talked before audience, that's for sure.
yeah. People ask about audience a lot, and it's actually really complicated because part of me feels like if you write for audience, it's a struggle to figure out how to be true to yourself. But then I mean, maybe that's not true. And so I do particularly feel like I worked on this piece. It was for audience. The first audience I knew was going to be people who were incarcerated. Um, but I also knew that I was writing it with multiple audiences in mind. And so it was both like people who were currently incarcerated who I wanted to, perform for them first. I never did theater before. I never knew anything about heart before this show. So it wasn't like I expected to be. I'm so honored to do it in so many different places. My first intention was just people in prison as an audience. And then I think the layer behind that, though, and a couple of layers behind that I would have probably never articulated, although it was always a part of the picture, was like, what does it look like to have like your mom be the audience that you're targeting this to? What does it look like to have the three people that you walk past on at the bus stop some morning be the audience? And I think that's what live theater allows you to kind of imagine, is that you don't control the audience, but you get to see them, and then you get to see them responding to you.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about responses, I know how I responded, watching the play, and I got to say I was so spoiled because I got to see it 3 nights in a row. Like, just seeing different elements of it and just see how you just unfold and reveal things. And, something that you reveal is like your relationship, with your father, or the lack of one, right? But you also gingerly, it's I think you do it in a delicate way, how you insert your sons into the story. And so I'm curious to know, how do you, because Dwayne, everybody can't tell a story, and not everybody is a poet. And when you talk about, roses are red, violets are blue, that's like it for many people. So,
Yeah.
here it is. You are recognized as the poet that you are and the storyteller that you are. But do you use that skill in storytelling to also parent? And does your children even have that same knack of storytelling or poetry or yeah.
That's an interesting question actually, because so one, I mean, I just dropped one of my sons off at the library. I'm at the library right now, and so books are a fixture in his life. But I think that but they both like to draw. They both like to tell stories. I don't know. That's the interesting thing. Like, how do when you're young, and how do you determine who it is that you're going to be when you're younger? How do you give some kid permission to like be a lot of different things when they're really young? And so I probably think me and my wife, we both work hard to try to get them permission to be many different things, and so they both play different instruments. Um, my youngest plays the clarinet, my oldest plays the violin, and clarinet, I'm like Eric Dolphy, and then I'm reading this poem that my man John Murillo wrote about Eric Dolphy, which is not a poem about Dolphy at all, but it's a love poem. But anyway, I'm reading this to my kid, and I guess that I'm doing that to tell him that stories matter, and that maybe I do parent through stories because we're constantly telling them stories. But also because we've needed stories to explain ourselves, time and time again. And I think that they've seen me rely on stories to try to explain myself, whether I'm explaining it myself to the world or to them.
Right. And that goes to a very, I think, necessary question and response from you, because I love the way you think, brother. So I just want to know, how people always talk about, owning the narrative, right? And when you talk about the way we tell stories, that is our opportunity to own a narrative. But I tend to wonder, what does that really entail? Does owning it just stop at telling the story? Or are
Mm.
those, are there actions that follow up? So I think of you with Felon. It didn't stop there, because it's now American Washington. There's now a play, right? There's now more. So I'm just curious to know, when we talk about like really owning stories and owning the narrative, what does that look like for you? Okay, it looks like we might be having a little bit of connection issues. Let's see if my brother's back in. Okay, give you a couple of seconds. I was I was saying to myself, darn, my brother, can you hear me? I thought it was a part of some drama. Like, this is what it this is what owning the narrative is like, a blackout. We'll give him some time to come back in. But I thank you all for watching and enjoying. I'm quite sure you're enjoying this discussion. And I hope that you tune into future talks like this. So, once again, Freedom Reads, have the QR code. Hey,